All righty. Sounds like I'm the last session of the day, so I think I'm going to get started, and I'm going to try to keep this as high energy and as fast and furious as I can for everybody. Thanks for taking some time to join me today, and I'm going to spend a little bit of an hour sharing what I've been learning and what we've been learning here at D2L in terms of some ingredients for supporting modern learning, and all of the different ways we might define that after the last year. So just by way of introducing myself, my name is Kenneth Chapman. I'm Vice President of Market Research here at D2L. D2L is short for Desire to Learn, and we're the company that builds the Brightspace LMS. So if you're familiar with Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, then you're familiar with a lot of the same things that we're trying to achieve and for some of the problems that we're trying to solve. I've been in the ed tech and the LMS space for over 18 years now. I actually was fortunate enough to be able to start working on the Brightspace LMS while I actually finished my degree on the LMS at the same time. So, while there's not a lot of chalk on my hands from direct teaching experience, I've been spending the better part of the last 2 decades learning from and really trying to work closely with educators that are pushing the boundaries of platforms like ours. Today, I run our advisory board program, talking to executives in K-12, in higher education, in colleges and universities, and even in corporate learning, and trying to understand the types of innovations, use cases, barriers, and successes that they're having that we can build into how we're supporting our own customers and the way that they're trying to build out their learning experiences. So my goal here is really just to share some of what I've been learning in my conversations with key leaders and key institutions that have struggled through really learning some lessons throughout COVID and over the last few years, really, and understanding how to build out a modern learning experience and a future-proof ecosystem to continually support modern learning as the inevitable change we're expecting continues to take shape. I'm all for keeping it informal, and it looks like we have a small group of people here today. So if anyone has any questions or disagreements, please raise them in the chat, and I would love to make this a little bit more two-way. I'm more than happy enough to continue talking, though, if you like what you hear, I guess. I think it's been a really interesting year. I mean, I think a lot of us in ed tech, when the pandemic began, I was really fearful that we were going to, be in this fork in the road where all of these people were forced into designing learning online and learning online, that we might turn off a whole generation that didn't get an optimal experience, that felt rushed, that had too much of that cognitive load, that didn't feel that they were situated for success. And really optimistically, I found in continuing to talk to educators and learners is that a year into this, there's more optimism, more energy around, what can we reintegrate from what we learned in crisis level instruction into whatever our new normal is. And there's this sense that there were benefits and there was a greater level of sophistication around conversations on equity and accessibility that I want to touch on as I look at, what are some of the real shifts that have happened in learning, and how can technology be in service of some of the strategies that your organizations might be taking to follow along with these changes. So a little bit about D2L, if you don't know much about us, I'll be really quick here. We're a global company. We've got, we had offices all around the world and headquartered in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. None of that really matters now. We're all just on Zoom. There's about 15 million learners using Brightspace each and every day. And we are about 900 employees worldwide. We have hired about 200 people in the last year, and we have another 100 or 150 people that we're trying to bring on. Lots that we see right now where we really are working to accelerate our roadmap, beef up the level of support and expertise that we can provide to so many of our customers that are trying to struggle through some of the shifts that are happening in their students and in their institution. So something that's a little bit different about D2L when we're talking about a learning platform and an LMS is that we actually deliver the same Brightspace LMS to K-12 schools. My daughter is 5 years old and she learns on the same platform that would be deployed at a higher education institution, a full statewide system or a small community college. Brightspace is used for professional associations. If you are a concrete pourer in Texas, you might be using that for your professional accreditation, as well as large enterprises. So places like Accenture, VMware, Tractor Supply Company. We deliver and support a really broad range of learning models and organizations on purpose. We're not doing that so that we can try to sort of squeeze more out of technology that we've built, but we really do that to try to get exposed to as diverse a set of learners as possible, of use cases, of delivery models, to really understand how do we build out a platform that is future-proof and that fundamentally looks at the human as the center of what we're trying to build towards and the metrics we want to be focused on, rather than around the institution, the assembly model of supporting the back-end business and the people that are actually delivering to the end student. So while a lot of the capabilities and code that we write are very, very similar between K-12 needs and higher ed and corporate learning in terms of tracking learners and evaluating activities, the way that they're presented, the way that they're captured and utilized to design for those different audiences varies wildly. So it really challenges us to think about making it easy to meet an educator where they are when they're trying to design an experience for a certain audience. Really lean into this idea of templating different types of delivery models and for different types of learners, and even how information is architected so that the cognitive load on the learners that are benefiting from that is lower and they can be focused on what they're actually trying to go and learn. And more often we're seeing, and I'll touch on a few of these examples, where the lines between K-12, higher education, and corporate are blurring more and more. In its simplest forms, we see professional learning and professional development happen more and more often where educators are learning in the same environment that they're going to design for their students and for their learners. They're building the empathy and being a consumer where there will soon be a designer for their students. And of course, we see the lines blurring between higher education and industry and corporate in the conversation around upskilling and reskilling, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it's kind of unavoidable today. Ultimately, I felt like the word of the year from the organizations that I've been talking to is resiliency. COVID's really laid bare some of the gaps that exist in access to technology, to different types of learning environments, to funding, and even to instructional design and to instructional design expertise to understand how to leverage technology for these purposes. A lot is happening right now at organizations that are reflecting on, what did we do during this crisis level instruction? And what do we want to take from that as we do a reintegration phase into what our new normal, as I hate that term, but I keep saying it. So building on resiliency, looking at how we adapt to the expectations that we're seeing in our learners and the way that they are changing and becoming more savvy as consumers. I'm hearing that again and again from top leaders is that their learners are becoming much more savvy when they're looking at how they're spending their money and what type of experience they're looking to get. They're used to having an always on, about me, built around me experience online, and they're expecting this as they're learning online as well. In the words of a CIO I was working with recently, students are sniffing out and rejecting that commoditized online delivery in favor of more personalized approaches. So ultimately, what a lot of the conversation we have with different institutions is about, it's about moving towards this idea of transforming and really transforming out of wherever they are today. Some organizations, the past year has just been spent learning some hard lessons about how to build up digital infrastructure. For others, it was about scaling up really quality practices, centralizing things that are working well, building out enablement programs, and advocating for things at scale that were working in smaller formats or that took a lot of effort that you want to reduce the effort to build out more broadly. The key point we're finding here, though, is that even within a specific institution, there's a large spectrum in how sophisticated, how ready individuals, groups are to take on new ideas, to adapt to new change, and to respond to changes in a business model, delivery model, credentialing models, wherever the case may be. There's a huge amount of change management involved, as well as empathy of how broad that spectrum can be. What was really interesting in sort of this spectrum of transformation as COVID was going on was watching fully online schools, where there was no service interruption for them. And they were able to take that as an opportunity to rethink and continually try to improve their student support models. Their students were still working in the same way, but maybe they had kids at home, they had distractions, they needed new mental health support. They might need new financing models to continue to maintain their tuition. Lots and lots of different ways for them to start to up-level and to think about improving their experience. Key here is organizations are going to continually move up the level of sophistication at different speeds and at different paces, but inevitably running into a ceiling and being blocked along any of these real strategic imperatives is a real challenge and can create problems in trying to maintain a technology ecosystem that lasts over years. And beyond just the ability of individual departments or faculties within an overall institution, there's a huge diversity in the individuals that we're needing to support, enable, in terms of how ready they are to adopt new technologies, new ways of doing things. And I love this diagram from MindWires and Phil Hill that really just talks to the clumping. There are so many individuals in the mainstream, and it's just so important to nail that easy, that frictionless, that accessible way to take advantage of new practices that you might be advocating for that are part of that reintegration, and to reduce the size of that chasm that they need to straddle. That little bit of discomfort needs to have a payoff. They need to see a reduction in the amount of time that they're spending or an improvement in the ability to serve their students. But that needs to be clear, and there needs to be a close connection between that work, that discomfort, and that payoff. So with that in mind, sort of setting the stage, I want to talk a little bit about some of the ingredients that we're seeing are necessary to adapt to, and in a sense to future-proof an approach to technology when strategy and what you're going to be executing against can be pretty uncertain right now. So basically, the hypothesis that we've had is the only certainty we've got is that things are going to change, and we need to bet on that change and know that the way we're supporting design, delivery, credentialing, and community for our learners is going to need to be quite flexible over the next few years. Programs might start off really simple. They may get really advanced. There may be brand new innovations that are happening that require brand new funding models and enrollment models. Instructors might want to be benefiting from templates. They might want to be thinking about designing in reward schedules for their students so that there's that feel of near real-time recognition of progress while they're working through courses. And we know that as things are changing in online learning experiences, learners still need to have that level of cognitive load managed for them. They need some support of their executive function and understanding where are they situated, what is most useful for them, what do they need to focus on. And as much as possible, where platforms and technology can make it easy to do that or build it in, It serves the educators better by not overwhelming them. It serves the learners better by ultimately delivering around their individual needs. So I'll back it up, and at the risk of being a little esoteric and overly into history, the way we at D2L have thought about building a modern learning platform, and we've been thinking about this for 20 years, was to start at really granular permissions, to really understand that an instructor at one organization isn't necessarily going to do the same thing at another organization. Even within our first customer, University of Guelph, my alma mater, one instructor in one group had a different idea of how they wanted their discussion boards and their gradebook set up. And rather than introduce compromise, we decided, let's introduce granularity. Let's talk about what can people do and define what that role looks like according to what the institution saw it as. Then we looked at, you need to build in groups and sections. You need to build in the ability to orchestrate how are you going to manage and administer grading, differentiation, markup, collaboration, all of the different ways that we can subdivide people that are in what would traditionally be a course. And we thought, of course, about, well, how do we then take the data and the reporting and make sure that that is accessible and injectable into other workflows, other systems, standards, et cetera. And then we built some tools. And the tools you'd expect from an LMS, content, discussions, assignments, quizzes, grades, but done so on a platform that deeply appreciated the fact that each individual could have a very different experience across working with those tools. They could be deployed for different use cases and different purposes, depending on what the strategy of the organization were. From there, we were able to introduce rules. We call them release conditions. Rules now lets us say, well, let's create at scale a learning design that is going to recognize choices, performance thresholds, attributes of our learners, and that can differentiate the learning experience for them wildly and at scale, creating these systems of rules. They can be layered on to provide, step-based mastery and progression. They can be based on a choose your own adventure model. The key is that the philosophy itself of building a platform was not one size fits all, but rather designed around an individual and very much a fluid set of rules to orchestrate that experience. And then kind of late to the game, frankly, we figured out only in the last, I would say, 4 years, it's dead imperative that this needs to be easy. It needs to be dead simple. It can't turn off or look hard. So there needs to be a modern activity-based user experience on top of this. You can have all the most flexible and cool and pedagogically sound tools in the world. They're not easy, they're not gonna get used. And that was a real big lesson learned over the last few years. So what we've been recognizing is it's not about a specific feature or function, it's about the tool set. And it's about how the tool set can come together to design a learning experience. And so that's kind of what we've been working at over the years, is to move up this stack and really emphasizing now on that modern, easy, meet you where you are type of experience. And so what we think of when we're building out our design philosophy and our approach at D2L is we want a platform that's going to work for everybody, but we don't want to do that so that it is constraining that power user. Those people that are just going to innovate and they're going to do something awesome no matter what's in their way. They'll have cuts and bruises and thorns poking out of them, but they're going to figure it out. Those people are super powerful. You want to bottle elements of what they've done. You want to advocate for and look for ways to scale up some of the neat discoveries that power users make. But you don't want to do that at the expense of these first-time instructors, particularly as when we were thrown online over the course of the last year. We have more first-time instructors or more, at least, potentially overwhelmed educators accessing technology like this than we've ever had before. Maybe the curve here doesn't look normal. It's more like a chi-squared or something. But the point is, we want to meet that first-time instructor where they are. Absolutely. We want to make it easy for them. We want them to have a positive experience, but we don't want them to have to stop there. We want them to be able to discover more sophisticated ways, additional ways for them to engage their students. we want them to do so in a way that's not overwhelming, but that's more exploratory. That's about them discovering that. So a lot of work for us goes into balancing how do we maintain that nice push and pull between a power user and a first-time instructor. The design philosophy we use here, if you're interested, is called progressive disclosure, which basically means give the basic things you need to do to, let's say, create an assignment. Here's the instructions, a grade item, and maybe a link, and away you go. But you can discover the ability to only release that as a remediation activity to a certain group, or to make this an observed in-person assignment that also includes some group work and peer assessment. Key there is we don't want to create the ceiling, but we don't want to create those compromises for the power users either. And it's hard. There's a lot of balance involved there. Ultimately, it means, if we give everybody the same stuff, we're not doing everybody a proper service here. Everybody needs different things. We need to meet them where they are. Another way of looking at this equality versus equity diagram here. So when we think about people designing learning, we want them to create experiences that support each of their learners as individuals. And I'll talk about some of the ways that we can do that, but I alluded to that already with the more of that rules-based approach and rejecting that one-size-fits-all model. Ultimately, this is about accessibility. I mean, it's not about accessibility in the sense that we need to support a screen reader or be Section 508 compliant. I'm talking about accessibility with capital A, capital of the whole word. It's about ensuring the environment that we're creating for learners allows those individuals to participate fully. And so that might be bringing elements of their own cultural background experiences into how they demonstrate what they know. That might be the ability for them to interact in their own native language. Or that might be that they have accommodations that support their ability to access the technology on an old iPod Touch because their family just doesn't have a newer device that can download from the App Store. Or as we think of traditionally with a screen reader or other assistive technologies. But the key is when we're thinking systematically about accessibility as broadly as that, we're going to benefit everybody. And so to double click on that a little bit more, at D2L, we like to think of accessibility as a full stack process. I'll share an experience I had in 2004 that totally changed our view at D2L of how we support accessibility. So back in 2004, I would have said, we are Section 508 compliant of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Yes, we're accessible. And I walked into a training session at an organization called the Audio Tactile Network and expected to train on how to use the LMS for 8 hours. And when we walked into a room full of keyboards and headsets, no monitors. And we had to spend the entire day training how to use the LMS on JAWS. And if you haven't spent a day trying to navigate a complex web application using a screen reader, it is eye-opening. And what we understood throughout that day was there was a strong difference between accessibility compliance and functional accessibility. Using my screen reader, I could perform all of the tasks I needed to do, but they were taking me 10 times the amount of time, literally. And so what we learned is that when we're building out accessibility, we need to think about it as a full stack exercise, and we need to think of it as functional accessibility. If a sighted user can do this task using drag and drop in 5 seconds, I need something that's of a similar order of magnitude of time for that to be functionally accessible. So the technology, the platform itself, absolutely, that needs to be a focus. The content that's created within the platform itself, that's a key part of ensuring that accessibility is full stack. It's awesome that there's all these great enterprise level compliance tools to validate that there are alternative formats, but it's also helpful to look at front loading the content created to be accessible. In Brightspace, the way we do this is we build in content templates. So they're templates that are preloaded into our editor whenever you create some content. They're responsive. So they scale to the size of a screen beautifully. There's no horizontal pinch and zoom. And they start off accessible. They have grid summaries, and they're just there for subject matter experts to stop worrying about layout of information and to worry more about capturing what they're their ideas and their interactions. Great thing for students when they have templates like that is if there's a module introduction, They know where to find the information. They can scan for that. It's in a template, and it's reliably laid out. A lot of the surveys we do with students really underscore that importance. And then lastly, when we're thinking about a learning platform and supporting full stack accessibility, universal design for learning is critical to that. We think an LMS that's going to support modern learning has to have the principles of UDL at its core, which means there needs to be multiple ways to deliver and allow for learners to engage with concepts and ideas and content. There needs to be variety and choice and diversity in how learners can demonstrate what they know and their mastery and their acquisition of new knowledge and skills and abilities. And there has to be some choice and variety in how an individual chooses to engage with the learning environment that they're presented with. These are ideas that are encapsulated in that design philosophy that I tried to talk about before. And at the risk of alienating any folks that aren't overly technical here, I look at the progression of the LMS over the next few years. I think is going to be really building up almost from a primitive programming language up into no-code software development. I think we're going to see a lot more innovation, a lot more emphasis on building up the support for and the frameworks for quality pedagogy and building out learning activities on a learning platform rather than configuring tools, if that makes sense. And still on accessibility, we try to educate our customers as much as possible, and in the educators designing using Brightspace, that this applies to everybody. Situationally, we all need some kind of accommodation. Closed captioning, any video taken within Brightspace, we automatically close caption that video. Not because it's necessarily going to be helpful for somebody that has an impairment of some kind, but because my kids are screaming behind me half the time. And if I lose the ability to hear the audio for a few moments, I can continue to watch the captions that are going on. This is important. We're not building accommodations and fixing things on the back end. That doesn't benefit everybody, and it's extremely expensive. It costs 100 times as much to fix a bug or an accessibility issue than it does simply to empathize early on and design it into the process. When we think about ingredients for modern learning, responsive. I talked about this a little bit before. Learners are going to need to be able to learn anywhere they are on any device, and that doesn't necessarily mean be able to download something from the App Store. Brightspace, for example, if it's a laptop, an iPad screen, an old phone or a phablet, doesn't matter. If it has a browser, you can access any of the capabilities on it. We think that's extremely important. Again, if there's my daughter is using a second generation iPod Touch. She can't download anything from the App Store on that, but she can absolutely leverage her learning there. We take advantage of building out our architecture in the most modern way possible. So we built out collections of microservices. These are basically little encapsulations of code that we can remix and we can repurpose to deliver different experiences for early learners versus corporate learning versus partner training. It lets us be really flexible and really malleable. And as we experiment with an idea in one area, we can quickly use that functionality in others. This is one of those ways that we can bet on change effectively. Standards are so important. I mean, going forward, I think standards are going to have a lot of room to grow. There's a ton of work to stay on top of standards and even harder to stay certified on top of those. And we try to hold ourselves to a tough bar there to be on top of and driving standards like IMS LTI, Common Cartridge, Caliper, and others. I think I'm really eager to see how the standard space in ed tech is going to evolve. A lot of the work we're doing right now is fantastic. We're getting really good at seeing interoperability across the ecosystem. I'm even seeing some great projects where learning engagement data is integrated across multiple different LTI providers into single data sets. That's awesome. I'm really eager to see how more interoperable specifications for pedagogy. starts to shake out, where you can design meaningful learning activities across different systems, and agnostic to different vendor providers. I think there's some interesting experiments right now that may hold some really exciting stuff for the future there. When we're thinking about key ingredients for how we support our learners, got to put them first. So in any way possible, supporting meaningful feedback. We try to ensure that video is available everywhere for students, including captioning that video, just recording audio snippets. We always try to make sure that you can look back to a student's previous results on any activities so that you can give them some feedback forward on anything that they were doing on the current assignment. We want to make sure that motivation is built into the design of the learning experiences as well. And this rules-based mindset we've had is really advantageous here. I can define an award or a badge based on almost anything that I want. Maybe I just want to encourage conversation, and the first person to post in a discussion topic gets a badge that their peers can see. Maybe I want to have it more based on recognizing milestones. But there, you can look at some of that reward scheduling as a design element that you can constantly be tweaking. My son, for example, is 9 years old, and when he finishes his weekly homework, he gets a little dancing Pokemon sent to him automatically. He loves it. And him and his friends are willing to compete for those things. We want to make sure that we support our learners having an active voice. We want to help them feel like they're contributing. They're expecting to be creators. They do that in their personal life all the time. They want to do that within their learning. So, supporting choice and voice and how they demonstrate what they learn. Creating more scaffolded ways to set expectations for learners on what they need to demonstrate. So really focusing on things like rubrics and tying those into learning objectives and making it clear for students what their expectations are, what the machinery that's going to be used to evaluate them will look like, so they can reflect on that throughout their process. And then lastly, really emphasizing and supporting competency-based and mastery-based models. With simply, it's a very efficient way to recognize what learners know and to progress them when they're ready, rather than based on seat time models. So again, meeting people where they are is a key element there. When it comes to data, I talk to a lot of organizations that have been spending a lot of time, energy, and money on focusing on learner analytics and weaving insights from data within the LMS and other systems into their student experience, into their curriculum, into their student interventions. And the best way that I can summarize what institutions do well versus those that struggle is the institutions that struggle or that run into that hype wall with their analytics efforts is that they treat it like a room in a house. There's a specialized group of people that intermittently are sharing insights from data and analyzing that, and it's not very accessible, and it requires time and energy and specialization. That can be a challenge. But those organizations that treat analytics or data and the insights from data more like a utility, like something I plug into to do a job, and that helps arm me with more information or more power to do what I need to do, those organizations are a little bit more successful. So I guess to draw another parallel to software development, which I don't know if these are landing at all, is that room in the house is more like that waterfall software development where you do it all at once and then you figure out if it worked. Whereas treating analytics like a utility, like something you plug into, is a little bit more like agile development. You're constantly learning from smaller steps and tweaking the next step. As one provost put it to me, we're looking for insights to act on, not a body count. And so, those are elements that are important to think culturally about the types of interactions that exist for access to data, for sharing insights from it, and quickly measuring impacts and making changes on them. I talked a little bit about this idea of rules and a rules-based platform or LMS. So what I mean by that is creating basic if-then statements to dictate what communications does an individual get and what learning activities are assigned to them, or even what groups or enrollments or opportunities connect are they rewarded with. Rules can be really simple. If a student gets over 80% on an activity, then give them the next module. They can be more powerful, right? If they viewed everything for chapter 2 and they haven't submitted an assignment, then remind them and send them one of those little email pokes. And it can be lots of different things in between. I've seen great utilization of checklists, where a learner actually checks on a checklist. How do you want to demonstrate what you know based on this unit? And if the learner might say, yeah, I want to show you my TikTok stream, and that's it. So they get presented to them an assignment, a rubric, and away they go. Somebody else might want to go and take a quiz. This rules-based way of calibrating student knowledge, student performance, student threshold, and turning that into a differentiated learning path, communications to their advisors, to their parents, or to the individual student directly is really, really powerful when it's done in a scalable way like this through rules. Another way we're trying to think about supporting more of a modern learning experience is scaling up some of the collaborations and partnerships that can form around in organizations that are delivering learning online. We're seeing more and more partnerships and collaborations between institutions than we've ever had before. And we've been seeing demand, to share courses and learning experiences without having to give away the course, basically. So, using standards like AICC, LTI, we've built out this new ability where we can publish a course that's sitting in an LMS instance, in our case, Brightspace, and we can publish that course directly into any LTI compliant LMS. So Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, we don't care. Really cool about that is if you've developed the course, keep the IP in your environment. Don't actually publish the whole course out. Reduce all of the admin hassle of managing rosters, user data, and reduce some of the friction to make some of these collaborations possible, and reduce some of the objections to preventing them from happening. So this way, you've got a seamless, secure transition, no user provisioning required, no single sign-on. Everything is kept nice and separated, and we're utilizing those interoperability standards that we're already taking advantage of on a day-to-day basis. So this is something we see being increasingly common. When a consortia might form where one of the institutions is a provider for some keystone areas and another is for different ones. They don't have to cross-list all of their stuff here and share out all of that deployments and all kinds of maintenance around that. They can centralize these things and just push them out to their partners as needed. Really interesting stuff that we're expecting to see some neat innovations on in the next couple of years. And then, as I was talking about some of the overlaps that exist between K-12, higher education, and corporate learning, skills connection and upskilling and reskilling, of course, belongs in that conversation. We're working with more organizations that are trying to find ways to collaborate around how do I show my employees that I care about their growth, that ensure that they are ready for the business objectives and needs that are being projected over the next few years. And from higher ed institutions, how can they remap, reorganize some of their credentialing and validation capabilities to support organizations that are looking for evidence of skill. If you think about what companies need right now, they need to know what skills their employees have within their organization. They need some evidence of that skill, and they need that data to understand, at what level are they? Are they novice? Are they expert? Are they somewhere in between? And this validation and credentialing is a core strength of within higher education. Technology to help bridge these connections can go a long way to facilitate these collaborations. There's great things happening around the comprehensive learner record, and there's lots and lots of stories every day around some of these upskilling and reskilling partnerships. And I think the last thing I wanted to say before I just give a really quick example of a customer living some of these ingredients of online learning in a more of a modern age. One thing I want to say around the future of the LMS and supporting modern learning is it's not going to come from a course-based model. The LMS historically has been based around a course, and that's great. It worked as a skewmark for what existed on our campuses. In our campus, a student walks into a building, they sit down in a classroom. In the LMS, they log in to the website and they click on their course tile. That's worked. That's a familiar analogy, but it's not overly flexible. It's not centered around the learner. And it inevitably imposes limitations on what you can do in designing a learning experience. And especially when there's multiple technologies working together in a whole ecosystem like we're seeing today, like Zoom, publisher content, the LMS, domain-specific cool subject simulations, whatever. So again, with that idea of betting on change, we believe that next generation platforms that's going to be more open is going to be based around learning activities. And here we're going to see things designed around learning activities that are assigned to individuals, groups that might have all kinds of connections defined that fall outside of traditional instructor-students, or even the one-size-fits-all nature of many courses and delivery models. Courses still work, traditional programs still work in this sort of mindset, but it gives us much more flexibility into how evaluation, assessment, credentialing can work in the future. Learners can interact with different activities and be evaluated in different methodologies. Designers can create much more individualized paths without having to do everything manual themselves. Supporting this kind of architecture model at scale is really important. So I probably went too into the weeds there, talking a little bit about architecture, but I think we're coming up to a point where the restrictions of a purely course-based model built into our core learning platforms is going to become very restrictive. And it's something that we're attuned to and trying to get ahead of right now. So with some of the time I've got left, I just want to walk through a really quick example here from an organization that I actually just finished doing some professional learning through, and it was organization called Athabasca University, and a little splinter cell out of that, or a startup out of it called PowerEd. So PowerEd is an award-winning program. It recently got 2019 Peer Choice for Best Online Program. And then in 2020, won an award for Best Pivot for Online Education. And I think 2020 was probably a good time to pivot in online education and be recognized for that. And so what PowerEd's focused on is not traditional higher education learners, but micro-learning modules and certificates for corporate organizations and professional learners. Small unit, entrepreneurial, out of Athabasca University. So that's Canada's biggest online school in Alberta. And it's only 5 people. And so they use Brightspace, and they partnered with a number of different organizations to build some really quality skills-based learning for them. I just recently took a allyship and inclusion course through PowerEd. I found it through a really smooth registration process. It helped me understand what was the delivery model, what was the time it was required from me. I actually signed up from it when I was on my phone. So taking advantage of that responsive access from anywhere, any device type of mindset, a really nice, clean presentation of a catalog and a seamless onboarding experience. Within PowerEd, as soon as you start working within and are inside the LMS, their content is built in-house. It's really engaging. It's really fluidly integrated in with the environment. They've built nice interactive formative assessment activities. I get immediate feedback as a learner based on what I've selected. I have links out to remediation materials that helps me refine my understanding of a learning objective if I demonstrated I didn't totally understand that. They've gamified elements of it. So they've built up awards, leaderboards. They've found milestones and recognition points based on the rules in Brightspace that capture when an individual gets an award. They've released points based on completing different activities in a course. And they've done that, again, using these rules. They've made sure that their awards or their badges reflect their brand identity, that look and feel that they want their learners to feel is all one. It's all part of that same ecosystem. They're really encouraging their learners to capture and share subject matter expertise. So where they're getting a lot of interaction is, when learners can upvote and vote up and down discussion posts, and really seeing a lot of interactivity when they're leveraging video. Anywhere that you can go and type into Brightspace and communicate with others, you can just drop a webcam video in there too. And then they brand it. They've got a great way of distributing administration. So for example, here, Save on Foods can track their learners and the engagement levels they have and their completion. But PowerEd can hang on to and administer the things that they care about, and they can push changes into the course and administer it the way that they want to. And then using more of that rules-based framework that I was talking about before, they use data-driven messages in an automated fashion. So they do that to increase engagement. If somebody has tapered off and how often they've been interacting with their learning, they can give them a little nudge. Hello, Kenneth, you haven't come in and looked at this in the last week. By now you should go to this link. They can recognize progress through these automated messages. They can alert a manager or a guide on the side once a milestone has been met or when there's an interaction necessary. Really great way to personalize learning at scale. So I just use that as a really quick way to highlight, some of those ingredients and those ideas brought together to provide what for me was an extremely fluid and seamless experience as a learner. My progress was recognized as I went. I was recognized as an individual. I had some choice and voice in what I looked at. And ultimately, I was able to access that learning anywhere that I was and had the same quality experience. So my advice to any leaders, anyone that's miring through thinking about technology platforms and otherwise, it's not about the technology. It's about really understanding, what job are we really hiring, a tool, a technology, a thing to do for us. And let's really interrogate what that job looks like. What are the parameters of it? What are the whys of any of the real time and energy we're putting into addressing that job? And so, my experience with so many organizations over the years is really the biggest transformation, the greatest change comes not from any great technology or killer app or killer feature. It's this blending together, and it's this sort of harmonious intersection of a strategy, the pedagogy. What do I want my learner experience to be like? What does that success look like? The technology that's going to be in support of and an enabler of those things, and the change management, the communication, and the ongoing support and advocacy for that pedagogy and the best practices and technology. When all of those things are coming together, that's when we really see transformation start to take form. It's not about the tech. It's not about anything shiny or overly magical. And I'm sure that's not news to anybody here. The last thing I just want to mention, and it's one of the hardest things to overlook, especially as things move fast and get exciting, but it's to ensure empathy. In building out technology and platforms, it's so important to build the right thing, to really understand what problem are you trying to solve. What was the job that really this thing was meant to do, and then build the thing right. And a lot of time and energy and discipline goes into doing that, and understanding that the problem space, empathizing with the people that need to work within that problem space and deliver a solution, and to continually refine, test, and execute against the right solution and hypothesis against that. And so that's achieved by a number of different activities. Design studies and empathy and empathy building is one of the biggest things I find that we can do as a vendor to be a partner to the community. One of the things I'm really encouraged at is how much EdTech providers are ensuring that very diverse sets of learners, educators, and administrators are part of their product designs. The community at large really does do a lot of outreach and trying to understand that. And I think that's going to be, again, critical to understanding how do we support just the rapid and substantial amount of change that's inevitable on these platforms and in how we deliver learning to students over the next few years. Okay, I have literally 1 minute left. I'm sorry for taking so much time. I hope this was useful. This is the kind of session where I really miss being in a room and seeing reactions in body language and conversation. I hope you took something away from it. If you do have questions and we run out of time here, I'm happy to stick around, or you disagree with me, my email address is Kenneth, Kenneth @d2l.com. I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.